True Sons have this area locked down, but if you can capture their control point, you'll be clearing the way for the settlement to take it over.
Hello, Johnny from Eurogamer here, and this week I got hands-on with a brief section of The Division 2. I uploaded the full gameplay on our channel, in fact, if you want to watch it without me talking over the top. Playing The Division 2 felt very familiar in terms of the core mechanics, which is no bad thing, but there's also an awful lot of new stuff to get to grips with as well. So, in order to help you prepare for your trip to sunny, sullied Washington DC, here are 11 new things in The Division 2. First up, as I just mentioned, The Division 2 takes place in an entirely new location, namely Washington DC. As well as being thematically appropriate for the game's story, DC being the seat of power and administration in the United States, it also offers a refreshingly different experience to the narrow, gridded streets of New York. In a presentation, in fact, the game's creators were keen to tell us all about the variety DC offers when compared to NYC. Whereas New York only offers two biomes, those being residential and financial, the DC of The Division 2 has a whole host to offer. These being the flooded commercial district and Capitol buildings, nature biomes in the form of the parks and also Roosevelt Island, you've got the suburbs of Georgetown, abandoned residential areas, and then of course the open historic sites such as the presidential monuments. See? Varied. Second, and it doesn't take a genius to work this one out, but it's definitely not snowing in The Division 2. For those keeping count, the game starts 7 months after the events of Black Friday, during which the so-called dollar flu first started infecting people. The attempts to contain it in New York failed, leading to the collapse of other cities like DC and, well, the whole country, in fact. Now, like New York before it, the city is in the grip of a number of factions, none of them pleasant, and all of them spoiling for a cover-based firefight. Anyway, I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, so just to recap, the second new thing in The Division 2 is that it's summer, not winter. Not entirely sure what that means for the number of collectible hats on offer, but hey, at least frostbite is no longer a concern. Anyway, so we know The Division 2 is set in DC, we know it's set in summertime, and we know it's got loads of different biomes, but it's also got a bigger map than the first. Not massively bigger, mind you, only 20% larger than the recreation of New York from the first game, but in what is apparently a first for an Ubisoft game, the recreation of Washington DC is pretty much 1-1. In presenting the game, the developers stopped short of saying it's a perfect recreation of the city, but said it would be very familiar to anybody who knows DC well. Either way, with the first game recycling locations rather a lot during its campaign and post-game, hopefully the larger map will help keep these different locations and biomes feeling fresher for a bit longer. Speaking of the endgame, the fourth new thing in The Division 2 is the chance to specialise once you've hit level cap. On attaining max level in The Division 2, you'll be given the chance to pick one of a few different specialisations, each with its own signature weapon. One has a crossbow, another has a grenade launcher, and there's also one with a 50 cal sniper rifle. These classes also have special abilities. For example, I played as the survivalist, i.e. the one with the crossbow, and the special power I got to try was the Chem Launcher. A fancy gadget that fires out a circle of flammable gas that works great as a fight initiator, or a way to clear out any enemies foolish enough to clump together. The signature weapons, meanwhile, are mainly designed to be used when a squad needs an extra bit of punch, a bit like the power weapons in Destiny. These signature weapons aren't the only new bits of gear on offer in The Division 2, mind you. There are some other shiny new toys for you to play with as well. There's a flying drone called a Hive, for instance, which is far more mobile than the auto turret of the first game and can really cause your enemies some trouble. Similarly, there's a new version of the rolling bomb from the first game which you can control more directly as it putters its way over to the enemy before blowing itself up. With the gameplay section being relatively brief, I didn't get much of a sense of the rest of the gear on offer in The Division 2, but I've been assured that an improved gear game is very much a focus for the sequel. Again, not sure what that means for hats. Answers on that as we get them. So we know there are new gadgets and guns for you to use in The Division 2, but what about the people you're going to be shooting at? Well, I already mentioned DC is in the grip of a bunch of bad guys, and so inevitably, The Division boasts some new factions. Again, the glimpse I got was tantalisingly slim. The only faction revealed thus far is one called the True Sons, who, to be honest, sound suspiciously like Far Cry 5-esque fanatical so-called patriots. We'll have to wait and see what other factions are in the mix, but I imagine they'll have their own motivations and favoured weapons, as in the first game. Maybe one of them will be made up of congressmen, senators and congressional lobbyists who are now out of a job, fighting hard on the streets of DC for the last few shreds of pork. That was a US legislation joke. For anyone keeping score? Now, as you'll doubtless remember, the story of the First Division was very much about trying to help the people of New York. You may also remember that, mechanically, that mostly amounted to you offering a candy bar or med pack to the occasional civilian begging on the streets in exchange for a piece of gear, like a new coat. This story beat apparently returns for The Division 2, but with a more substantial gameplay impact. Whether this means you can liberate local civilians and then have them help you out in the field, or some other mechanic, isn't entirely clear at this point, but I did notice during my playtime that some fairly ordinary looking citizens came to help out our squad toward the end of our fight, and then tried to set them on fire. Now, it's possible these people are simply taking the place of the Joint Task Force, or JTF, from the first game, but either way, I'm told The Division 2 will bring more meaningful interactions with civilians than the occasional peckish passerby. Also concerning the story of the first game, you'll remember a big focus of The Division's activities in New York was, well, trying to keep the dollar flu contained, and needless to say, they failed, because Washington DC really doesn't look so good right now. Anyway, an infamous part of the containment effort in New York was the creation of the Dark Zone. The murky area where the loot was good and the agents were, more often than not, bad. With the dollar flu very much spread across the United States then, is there really any need to create a Dark Zone in DC? In other words, will it be making a return for the sequel? Well, yes. Yes, it will. While I'm not sure of the precise story reasons for the second Dark Zone, suffice it to say there will be a brand spanking new one for you to explore in The Division 2. Now, the Dark Zone in the first game showed a lot of promise, and to be honest, I enjoyed most of my forays into that most dangerous of areas, but there's no denying it was also beset by people using exploits to give themselves an unfair advantage. I asked about this in my interview, and while I wasn't given any specifics, I was told that Ubisoft is planning a series of robust tests in order to ensure the same thing doesn't happen again in Washington, DC. Whether that actually rings true remains to be seen, of course, but it was encouraging to hear somebody who's making the game acknowledge the first Dark Zone's issues and say they're trying to iron out those problems in time for the next one. To be honest though, the Dark Zone isn't for everyone. As fun as it is, there are simply some agents out there who prefer to restrict their activities to teaming up with friends and taking on AI threats instead. Well, those players will doubtless be pleased to hear that the next new thing about The Division 2 is 8-person raids. In a first for the Division, you can assemble a jumbo-sized squad before heading into a challenging encounter in pursuit of high-level loot. These raids, I'm told, are designed to be very tricky indeed, and either way, it'll be interesting to see what the structure and the layout will be in order to support a double-sized squad, where before there were only 4 agents on offer. Now, when we were told about these 8-person raids in the presentation, the exact wording used was in the first year, another way of saying not at launch. That may be disappointing news to some, but either way it's a good opportunity to talk about the post-launch plan for The Division 2, which actually promises to be fairly eventful. Basically, in the 9 months after the Division 2 launches, taking us to the end of 2019, we can expect 3 new content packs, including new side missions, new gear, and even new areas, presumably ones designed to hold those swanky new 8-person raids. These packs are scheduled for release every 3 months, and apparently the first 3 ones will be entirely free. And finally, the last new thing I want to show you in the Division 2 is this fancy grass. Now, stick with me on this one. Basically, I shared the capture session with John from Digital Foundry, and he was very keen for me to capture some of the finer details of the world, which is when we found out the grass not only looks nice in the Division 2, but when you trample it, it stays flat. Swanky. And there you go, 11 new things in the Division 2. I'm quite excited about this one, really. I enjoyed playing the first Division with a bunch of friends, and I think I'm about ready to jump back in and start grinding for some fancy new boots and knee pads. But what about you? Your thoughts are very welcome in the comments below, as ever. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, we have plenty more for you to watch. They should be on screen now. Do like and subscribe for plenty more from Eurogamer, but most importantly, thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.